Welcome to what is a new season of the Agents Angle, as we once again look to delve into the world of football and soccer agents. With me, Jonathan Booker.
And me, Peter Paleologus. And after what was supposedly a summer break from things, yet the world of football agency is never really a break as such. We reflect back on what was an intriguing summer transfer window around the world in many ways, and what has happened whilst we've been away.
We will also be looking at what appears to be Chapter 2 in a dispute between an agent and a club that featured on the last season of the show, and how the roles in that saga have reportedly been reversed.
All that to come on this episode of The Agent's Angle.
Well, folks, we made it back. A lot of discussions and considerations during our time away on whether the show would continue or not for a second season of The Agent's Angle. In fact, I would go as far to say that we didn't even really know whether there would be another episode or not. And I think at one point, I actually convinced myself that there wouldn't be another episode, only to change my mind 7 days later after a bit of rest.
Yeah, look, in the first series, we did a very long series, 40 plus episodes. That's a lot of episodes, a lot of content. But always with the transfer window, you get inspired with deals. It was an interesting window. I mean, just from an Australian perspective, we've got Juan Mata and Douglas Costa coming to our shores. So, as you know, that sort of excites the local fans and the football business. But there was a lot of things that piqued our interest, so we're back.
And I think what's been nice is the feedback that we've had. And that, to an extent, has convinced us to come back for a second season. And those positive comments we're very appreciative of. So by public demand, here we are, we're back. But the show is going to change a bit for the new season, and we're going to see how it goes over time. The format of the show will feature guest shows, question and news shows, and some episodes will be focused on specific topics of a more technical and informational nature, rather than what I see as a bit of a mishmash over the last season. And another thing we're going to try and do is try and make it a bit more spontaneous, which I'm not 100% convinced by. Peter's a bit more comfortable with that than I am. Spontaneity isn't my forte. You have commentary experience, and the only thing spontaneous about me is when I combust when somebody annoys me, mentioning no organisations in particular. But for this episode, we're going to play a bit of catch up over the matters that may have happened whilst we've been away. And also we'll come to many of the transfer windows that have just passed, and some of those which are just about still open this summer. And we're going to start off with a story that is connected to another story we covered back in April on the Agent's Angle in the previous season. Now, previously this story was featured back in April, when an agent was found not guilty by a court of sending malicious emails or threatening communications to an English Premier League club official. But the boot now seems to be on the other foot in this case, as the agent in question is now suing the club in relation to commissions they believe are due on the same reported transfer.
But one thing before I get into the topic, Jonathan, we're both transparent. No hidden agenda, no fear or favoritism on this podcast. And that's important to our listeners to know where we're coming from. Now, straight into the story, and we're talking about Saif Al-Rubi. There was two prongs to this. One, it was a court case about his conduct. It was alleged he made threatening emails or sent threatening emails. He was cleared in a court in England. And then subsequently, he decided to sue for the money or recover the money he believed that he was owed from the Kutsuma transfer from Chelsea to West Ham. Just to give a bit of context, it was back in 2021. And he believes there was an agreement in place for the commission, and Zuma, we know, was sold for over 30 million euros. And once threatening email issue went away, he filed a lawsuit against Chelsea. It's an interesting one because I say agents don't earn money all the time, and big fees like this, they're going to chase. And he mentioned this Ruby, of course, he said his 2.5 years was very difficult, obviously facing that jury trial. But now he wants to take action, right or wrong, that he believes he was owed money. there is a dispute in relation to how much he's owed, because Chelsea argued that Ruby never represented the club in this instance, and he actually tried to involve himself in the deal. This is a type of matter that's perfect for an agents tribunal. Who's owed the fee? Who made the deal? Whose involvement? It's a pity we don't have that outlet at the moment. Obviously, this can also go to the English tribunal, the Rule K tribunal, but it also serves something. It's all about document trail, your WhatsApp trail, your reliance on representations. Very important to get all that in writing, because as agents, as we know, yes, we do get some trail commissions, but we rely on those fees when they're paid, and when they're rightly ours, we need to pursue them and get them organised.
Yeah, beyond the fact of it going to a civil court, I think for me it was pretty much a shrug of the shoulders, because disputes between agents and clubs over commissions, either if they're paid or when they're paid, because generally you get a lot of cases where payments are late, they aren't really that rare. But because it was going to a civil court was interesting from a football related aspect, because it can't go to FIFA yet, as arguably there's not really an international dimension to this one. People could argue there is. It would normally go to Rule K arbitration, the English FA's arbitration process. The agent in question, I looked at it and he's registered with the English FA. And looking back at the old intermediary list, he was registered with the FA around about the time of this transfer. So there's no evidence of unlicensed agent activity. And also, I look back at the FA agent transactions around this time for the selling club. And this transaction is on there, but no intermediary is named as representing Chelsea. There's somebody representing the player, there's somebody representing the club, but it's not this agent. So it's all very, very strange. Was it a commercially referenced deal rather than a sporting or normal player rep, or a case of the agent documentation not completed correctly or not lodged correctly or satisfactorily with the FA?
Yeah, look, it could be different elements here. We don't know, as you said. It's a lot of things we don't find out until, these court cases are made public, or we see when a decision's made, whether it's an arbitration or a court decision. We get that we can see what has been filed, what submissions been filed, what's been accepted as facts. And in this case, it's unclear, but obviously it seems to me that the agent seems to have a little bit to chase. He believes he's entitled to a fee. With club, normally you would have a mandate. Normally you would have paperwork, but all paperwork has to follow the same as we do with players. So there's no exception to that, and everything gets audited these days, or the regulators and the courts will look if people have complied. So it's at an interesting phase, but I think what would come out of it, if he does get his fee, will show other agents where things need to be in order to make a successful claim.
And on that matter, we've had one story there that we covered last season in a way, but we've got another story, or should I say player, that's kept on giving us potential content for over a year now. And this is before we get onto the transfer window in general. But the player I'm speaking of is Victor Osimhen, who's featured quite prominently in the transfer windows that have just closed or are starting to close. And I think we have to recap on so many things relating to him over the last year, not just the various clubs courting him. First of all, we had the social media post that we featured back in episode 14. And that seems to be the start of a lot of problems between the player and the club. We then had reports of investigations into potential fraud by a club official regarding this player's transfer. We then had the new contract signed, then he was frozen out, and even clubs and agents were reported to be working together so that the player didn't train. We've then had social media clashes and, shall we say, quite colourful language used by the player allegedly in the social media comments towards agents of his teammates. And what I've seen all the way along, and I'm quite a fan of what the agent for the player has said, Calenda, is that he seems to deflect the negative very well and say all the right things. But It's safe to say Osimhen's name has dominated the last day of the main transfer windows in Europe. There were moves to either the English Premier League or the Saudi Pro League, both of which seemingly fell through quite late. And then we had the announcement that he's gone to the Super League in Turkey, albeit from what we understand and from what's reported, it's on loan. But this is a really, really complicated one and a really intriguing feature of this transfer window. We've got the overlapping transfer windows. We've got different jurisdictions. We've got squad quotas. We've got other star players transferring and a transferring club in Napoli that has, safe to say, a reputation as quite tough to deal with in a transfer window. They stand their ground and they're very tough. But the whole Osimhen saga is probably an episode in itself. We don't have all the details, and it's all very well and good to speculate. There's plenty of people who want to do that, not just on this player, but lots of others. But this wouldn't have been an easy situation either for the player or indeed the agent.
No, this is a very complex. There's a lot of layers here. This is, as the Icelanders would call, a saga with many elements. It's got everything. You mentioned it started with possibly started with an unacceptable social media video of Osimhen, who gave Napoli their first league title for over 30 years. Standout campaign in 31 goals, I think, across all competitions in a great season. But some bizarre video that came in relation to a draw against Bologna sort of set it alight. And I won't go too much into that because we have covered it. But what we do know is Victor Osimhen has gone to Turkey. And then there's the layer of his agent and how he was involved in the deals. And it ended up not being the agent who made the deal or the term football intermediary is used actually, to make the deal to Galatasaray. So very, very interesting. I will say that a lot of layers, very interesting. We can probably give a whole episode. This is the hottest strike in the transfer window, probably after Kylian Mbappe, who secured his dream move to Real Madrid. Now, we know that Chelsea was probably one of the clubs that was chasing hard, and so was Al Ahly's, the Saudi Arabian club, was very interesting, but no one could seal the deal for the client. And in this case, Roberto Calenda, it's reported that he didn't seal the deal. And the way the transfer windows work is we know that with Italy and France and the English Premier League, they all finish around about the same day. And then a lot of players who may not get a deal, there are a couple of markets who can take very highly paid players, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And at the end of the day, especially the Turkish big clubs, Galatasaray, maybe Besiktas and Fenerbahce, and a deal was formed where Galatasaray decided to sign him on loan. So it's a loan from Napoli. Now, the intermediary mentioned was George Gardi. I believe he works close with Napoli. Not too sure. Don't want to speculate, but he finalised the deal. The interesting part, we don't know what Roberto Calenda, a renowned football agent, done a lot of deals. So he's got a track record. It's just what's happened has happened. And this is the other thing, that it's only now that a few transfer windows were still open, Turkey and Saudi, that maybe the deal wasn't done with the preferred club, but he had to go to one of those windows that was still open and well paid. So I'm not sure. They say Osimhen may be angry at the agent for not getting a deal, but we don't know.
And as with all of these things, there's more information coming out. Deals from the past, we learn more information on the contract, we will learn more information on the loan. And it's very interesting, the terms reportedly negotiated in favour of Napoli. And I haven't seen anything derogatory from the agent towards the player or vice versa. The thing is for me in this is if it's reported that the original player agent has parted company with the player or been left out of the deal, where does it leave them? Can he operate in Turkey or be paid as part of this actual deal? And if there is a dispute, where does it go? We've mentioned the FIFA Agents Chamber, but as it stands, that's suspended, albeit that if there was a dispute in this case, it would be of an international dimension. And the first place it would go would be the FIFA Agents Chamber.
It basically would go there because there is an international dimension. You've got a player originally from Nigeria, you've got an Italian club, you've got a Turkish club. However, that option is not available. So what option do you have? And then you've got also the Turkish regulations, the Italian regulations in this. So it is more complex. Where would you go? You probably go where the deal was made, but even there, do you have standing? You mentioned a very good point there. You need to have a bit of standing if you're registered. Now, obviously, with the FIFA license, and this depends when the agreement was signed, then you may be able to claim on work that you did. We know that. But did you do any work with the loan deal? Because it looks like Napoli, it's a direct sort of with Galatasaray, and they use an intermediary as in between that or a broker in Mr. Gardi. So we're unsure. This is a very interesting matter where it lands jurisdictionally. And this is one for the lawyers, and we're not here to give any legal advice, but it's complex because there's a big story. And then you've got a situation where money was paid, any commissions, and if there is a dispute between Mr. Candela and Osimhen, we don't know. We don't know.
But the question that all agents ask one another around about this time of year is, how has the window been? How has it been for you as an agent? And I met up with 3 agents informally in the 48 hours before the deadline in England, which is rare in itself that you can meet informally. And the general response from them was that it was quiet. They weren't expecting to do anything, but I don't think it's necessarily that the window is any quieter. I just think the market for agents is changing. The clubs are arguably being more cautious, but also the big deals and predominantly the domain of the mags now, the multi-agency groups.
Yeah, look, Jonathan, you're at the heart of English Premier League. You live in England and you're right in it, and your club's in it too. But I have sort of a similar, I would say, thought in the sense that this window was a little bit different, not as super busy. And mention mags or the bigger combined multi-agencies. Yes, in the big markets, they're very strong. In second tier markets, that's doing deals in those. When I say second tier markets, I'm talking about outside the top 5 in Europe, outside France, Italy, England, Spain, and Germany. But if you look at the top 10, 15 deals, not many of the big agencies have done that many deals. And this doesn't include renegotiation of contracts, of course. These are transfers, but it shows that maybe there weren't that many big deals. There's a lot of free players till the last minute. We know that. I mean, a lot of free players that weren't signed. So I think that you're right about that, that there has been a little bit of a market change, maybe to do with the rules that apply.
It was just strange with these 3 guys because these are guys I've known for many, many years. And this is the first window where I would say, probably with 1 or 2 exceptions across 15 years, that these guys haven't been doing anything. There's no cancellation of contracts on mutual agreement with the club so that the player can have free agency once the window closed. There was no contract renewals, there were no moves, and they weren't expecting anything. And the strangest thing was, you sit there and they actually turn their phones over. And that's a first for me. But the market's definitely evolving, and different markets are evolving in different ways, and they're developing some of them due to changes with agent regulations. We won't go down that route so early in season 2. League restrictions, tax legislation, and all of these have an effect on the agents involved. But what I noticed, there are more swap deals. They're rearing their heads. There's more loans, and I think they're more common than ever, and they're getting more complicated beyond whether it's an obligation to buy for the club or an option to buy. And for me, particularly in England, the market focus on young players is key, and that's been very much at the fore in this window. And with that element, you now starting to get more sell-on clauses, more buyback clauses, and with some of the cost controls on the trading of young, as they're termed, homegrown players, the clubs can actually bypass the cost controls of some of the leagues like the Premier League, or at least help their cash flow.
You mentioned some good points there. The trend is, and this is important for agents, they're the ones that are involved in negotiating. You mentioned sell-on clauses and loans with obligation to buy options, because at the end of the day, their players want to go to a certain club, but then want to have an opportunity to go somewhere else or be compensated somewhere else. So negotiation of those clauses are very, very important. Now, and Sell-Ons are very big. They're wanted by smaller clubs for talent they on sell. Loans are used by the bigger clubs to develop players, but also if they've got too many players or hoarding talent, they want some of the talented younger players opportunity to play games, and not just to play if there's an English club to go down a couple of leagues. Also loaning players out to Belgium or other competitive leagues across Europe.
And the
Buybacks.
loans element has actually changed as well because we've now got the loan restrictions. So it's not a case where clubs can hoard players. I'm not going to mention any Premier League clubs by name, but we've got a situation where they can't hoard players and then loan them out. There are actually now restrictions in place from FIFA, from the federations on that element, and that's obviously caused change as well.
It has. It has. It's one area that FIFA and even UEFA are sort of looking at, that the loan aspect has to be dealt with, and that's why these limitations are slowly coming in, and even loans between clubs that are part of, what we call multi-ownership deals and all that sort of thing. So there is a lot of interest by the regulators, but also the clubs as well need to develop the talent. The other thing is there's a lot of players free. And that's because clubs aren't signing as many free agents as they used to, or squad players, because they're also got the loan market. So that's pushed out quite a few established professionals who may have to step down a division, or there's a lot of unemployed free players capable for professionals, because there is this emphasis on young talent and developing it so you can generate transfer revenue. But then with the squad limitations, the loan limitations, and there's less jobs. I would say less jobs for a lot of players, and even the American clubs. I don't want to digress here, but MLS, a lot of those clubs are looking at developing and getting younger players. So a lot of established professionals don't have as many opportunities. We get CVs every day from a lot of European players who want to play in this part of the world that we haven't seen before. So that is interesting. You also mentioned, Jonathan, the swap. And I know there was an article, and we'll put it on our show notes, about the Premier looking at swap transfers that may get around their sustainability regulations. So the Premier is looking at those swap deals, whether there is a fair valuation between those two crossover transfers. You also mentioned buyback clauses, and we've seen that there's been a recent rise in buyback clauses. And I mentioned the sustainability. It's basically the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, which are having another effect in buybacks, because there's a mention that a lot of academy players who are developing, clubs will transfer them out, but have the option to buy them back if they're really making it happen and coming up. And that profit, I would say, or that development, basically, especially if the player goes on to be a top player, doesn't sort of cross over into the profit and sustainability rules. Now, it's a little bit unclear, and I know that Premier League's still got a long way to go with developing that model, but yeah, it's also making sure that a player who develops really well has still got control of him. An example of that with Chelsea was when Tammy Abraham, the English striker, moved from Chelsea to Roma in 2021. And I know Chelsea inserted, I think, close to 70 million pounds or euro, was a buyback clause in the contract should they want to bring Tammy Abraham back to Stamford Bridge. That was sort of the initial, one of the first ones, at least from the Premier League, but now it's become a flood.
And the biggest thing for me with this window, and it was missed by a lot of the media, is that this could be the last window of its kind. And even in the last week, we're recording this on the 11th of September, and I think it came out in the last couple of days that there's going to be a big ruling in October at the ECJ that could see the transfer window be very, very different the next time round.
Definitely. Diarra. You mentioned, Jonathan, that the landscape can change. And yes, we've just seen a recent article where it looks like the European Court of Justice is going to deliver a judgment on the 4th of October in the case of Diarra, Lassana Diarra, who's got the backing, I believe, of FIFPro and some other parties, against FIFA and the Belgian Football Federation. Huge case, because the Lassana Diarra case raises the questions of European Union legality with regard to free movement of workers and free competition. And it's examining, in simple terms, FIFA rules relating to the system and transfers. And what is the main FIFA rules that all us agents have to be examined on or be across, especially in doing agent deals? The rules contained in the FIFA regulations on the status and transfer of players, which is the RSTP. And I don't know if this quote, you may have to look it up, Jonathan, has come from the famous Bosman lawyer DuPont, but Lasana Diarra affair or case or matter could be the Bosman 2.0. Now, we have an Advocate General opinion. This is what happens with a lot of cases before the European Court of Justice. You get an opinion from a very esteemed attorney, lawyer, commissioner in the European circles that examine the contested provisions in this case. And I don't want to get too technical. These are European legislation and freedom of movement. They call it the TFEU and certain articles of that, but I won't go into too deep dive. But the opinion of the Advocate General in relation to a decision that it basically came out of a Belgium court. But the way European legislation should be interpreted when applying to these type of rules that FIFA has imposed is it precludes certain rules. And what rules are we talking about here? That when you have a player and club wishing to employ each other, and when a player wants to move, they may have to pay a penalty because the current club has the contract, and whether they're liable for compensation and how that affects the player in their move. Because I know when you breach a contract, both the club and the player are joint and severally liable in terms of FIFA law, CAS law, and all that. But looking at that, the application of rules have been looked at by this court, the European Court of Justice, and it may change. It may be seen as a restriction. So not just for the player, but the club wishing to employ that player. And what I mean by a player wanting to move, it's this when you terminate without just cause is the issue, and that's where you stop and you might have to pay a penalty. But even that's seen, could be seen problematic by the Advocate General. FIFA's rules, the RSTP, about stability, contract stability, certainty. However, what Lasana Diarra and his lawyers are arguing that this takes away his freedom, takes away freedom of contract and the penalties and all that. So it's at an interesting stage, and we will know probably next month, which is I think it's the 4th of October, Jonathan, and we will see what happens. There are other elements to this case. I won't go into it now, but if the case affects the RSTP in a fundamental way, in terms of freedom of movement of players and ability to contract and join new clubs, the impact will be enormous, not just in club contracting, transfer windows, and all these type of things will be assessed. There's be a lot of collateral damage as well, Jonathan. I will make something clarity that the Diarra decision may not apply to the EPL so much, in the sense that we're looking at a European court, and I'll be interested to see how the EPL reacts to the Diarra decision, which probably will mimic it, but that's another issue themselves. But we remember it's a European decision. I'm always interested how the Premier League, English Premier League, and the FA deals with those type of decisions. But it will affect the RSTP. So incoming players, entanglement, etc., also will be affected.
And with that case, when the opinion drops, as you've rightly said, it changes the transfer dynamic, it changes the transfer windows, it changes the culture and the market for agents, and the ramifications are huge. But the other thing that agents have got to be aware of is that we're now in a critical time for agents, both new and old. And there's quite a few dates and things that agents need to be aware of over the coming weeks.
Yes, it's September 2024. Remember, the licenses came in on the 1st of October 2023, or the regime, or the FFAR. So now we're at the end of September, we're approaching it. For renewals, there is a renewal fee. I think it's $300. I just renewed the other day, US dollars, that you have to pay FIFA on the portal. CPD requirements. If you're a new agent, 20 points. I believe legacy's 40, but also that doesn't include minors. The minor module, be able to work with minors, is separate, and no points are attached to it. That's more of an authorization. So I've been contacted by 3 agents who have not done their CPD, and I told them that's the first thing you should do. Put any deals aside. You've only got 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You've got to get your 20 or 40 points or 30 points, whatever you need. And now, in terms of there's an exam coming up in November, and from next year there'll be one exam a year, not two. But a lot of people preparing for that exam, and I notice a lot of literature out there, a lot of books. The whole industry's evolved, the whole exam industry's involved with all these trainers. So interesting times ahead.
And those are just the things that are written and documented, but there's also quite a few things that new agents and registered agents need to be aware of that aren't printed, that aren't documented. And we're getting reports of various kinds. And we know there's various bugs in the FIFA Agent platform. And some of these affect some people, but not others. We've had experiences of it where you've had glitches in the system, which I haven't experienced, and I've experienced glitches that you haven't. But some of the reports we've had coming in have motivated me to want us to advise agents to check the following issues. The first is a glitch with some of the digital IDs. Now, the reports I've heard and I've had relayed to me is that some of the QR codes on those lovely digital IDs, which you know I'm such a huge fan of, not. And so when
No,
you're
you're not a fan. No, you're not a
no, I'm not
fan.
at all. And when you're presenting a digital ID or a club asks for your digital ID or a player or a parent of a player, if it's a young player, and you present it, I recommend you check your digital ID is working because there's nothing worse than having that meeting, somebody going off and check it under the guidance of whether it be FIFA or the FA or a federation or a club, and it points into a page that doesn't identify you as licensed. So check your digital IDs and check they're working. Secondly, the agent platform is displaying some details incorrectly. And one of the things you mentioned was the CPD. And I've heard that some of the dates are showing incorrectly, either for when you got the deadline to complete your CPD or even the CPD that's been completed. And also, that draws into question, are the renewal dates displaying incorrectly? Now, if you refer back to the regulations and think about when you became licensed, you should be able to work out your renewal dates and your CPD. But if you're not sure, I recommend you check with FIFA where it's at. If you think there's a problem with the CPD on the portal, that it's marked for you. And finally, this isn't a fault of the platform as such, but it's something I came across both for myself and with other agents. Is that with the ping ID verification that you use to get on the platform, please, please, please assign it to at least two devices or two different methods of verification. Because if you lose your phone or it's damaged, and we all rely on our phones like they're golden in the agents industry, we can't operate without them. If you lose it or it's damaged and you haven't got another means of logging in and verifying, you can't get on the platform to do your CPD or renew your license to an extent. So, all valuable points. And I'll just stress to everybody, please go and do it because as of next year, you'll only have one chance to pass the exam. And if you lose your license in the intervening period, all that effort you've put in thus far can go down the drain.
Very good tips, Jonathan. I'm not here to add tips myself, but yes, there had been problems with the ping ID on people getting on the agents portal, current agents who want to do their CPD or even renew their license through the $300 US payment. We know the directory is not available yet. There may be reasons around that. The other thing I will say is to remind everyone, FIFA, at least the agents section, has moved to Miami, which means different time zones in the sense, especially for the European agents and Asian agents. So be mindful of that. But that doesn't mean that FIFA is not responsive. We know, and Jonathan has dealt with some of this, and myself, that especially with IT issues, they've got IT analysts in different countries, not just the US. So they will address your concerns, within the 24 hours. I'm not saying the time, but they have people working around the world. So they will be able to deal with some of the issues.
And just one of those issues that I raised, I actually had a very good and constructive interaction with one of the FIFA IT people, and they were incredibly helpful and helped a fellow agent out no end. So, all credit to them for that. And with that, it brings us to the end of the first episode of a new season of the Agents Angle. a lot covered in what is in essence a catch-up episode after our break from recording, but hopefully it's been of use to those listening.
Yes, we may be a bit rusty. It took a long break and just to try to get back into it, so apologies for that. But we really enjoy bringing this podcast to you. We've got some exciting initiatives this year. I'll just remind everyone there is a conference, especially for football lawyers in Saudi Arabia, the AIF conference. Look that up, mid-November. We'll look out for any regional conferences. There's a lot of conferences in football around that. And I'll give a bit of a shout out before I say goodbye. I saw that the second player association that I know of had an agents conference. That was Malaysia. FIFA Pro, which is the players union, they set up a workshop with agents, and that's good to see because I know we had one in Australia a month or two ago. So it's good to see other FIFA Pro members, players unions, national ones hold workshops and conferences about how agents should work in that country. Bye from me.
And of course, you're welcome to contact us here on the Agents Angle via email, questions@theagentsangle.com with any questions as such, the comments or suggestions for guests and topics you would like featured in the season ahead. And as ever, please follow us on the various social media channels also, leaving a review when you can, and of course sharing the episode and the features with others. So until the next episode of the Agents Angle, take care, and remember it's just 2 weeks now for many of you to get your licensed agent CPD up to date and complete your license renewal. Bye for now.
The purpose of the Agents Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.